Hi everyone, I'm Jakub. Hopefully you recognize me from my photo with glasses. What was that, Rob? Was that just a hi? Hi! It's amazing to see people, attendees, after 2 years of sitting at home and just staring into webcam when you present. So amazing that you were able to come here and that I was able to come here. So happy to be able to present in front of you. Today I will be talking about Pester 5 and Pester 4. As you probably know, Pester is my passion and it's my most, the open source project that I like the most. So I'm very happy to be able to talk about it here, like almost every year. There will be a raffle. I have this amazing mouse with me. If you're a streamer, it doesn't do any sound when it clicks, the ad says, so hopefully that will be useful to someone. If you enter this raffle, you can just put your name in, and there is no email, there will be no spam afterwards. You just fill out a few questions, and at the end, I will just randomly choose a person to get the mouse and get a t-shirt, hopefully. We will have the right size. I have a few of them here in the back with different designs, so hopefully we can find something, and maybe some stickers. It's just a little incentive for you to pay attention, and because all of the answers to the questions are in the talk, and they are pretty easy, so. Choose just a name that's quite unique, so we don't have 30 different Jakobs, because there will be only one selected, and then we don't know which one it is, and you will have to fight, so. There will be one more chance to scan this if you didn't manage to, so don't worry. Thanks to the sponsors that are sponsoring this conference, and thanks to all the organizers, because they really went into this with any certainty that it will happen, and took a huge risk, so. But in the end, we are here. So you probably know me, I'm Jakub, or maybe not. But you can check out my account on Twitter, or if you have any questions, send me an email on this email address. I have pretty good spam filter, so hopefully you will get through. And if you like my open source work, you can maybe consider sponsoring me on GitHub, because that's what fuels my development time, because I have to feed my family, of course, and also enables me to buy t-shirts like this and then give them out to people at conference. So finally, let's go into the talk. Why stop using Pester 4? First of all, Pester 4 is really old. It's 2 years old, that's the last stable release, and there won't be any more. So we stopped development on it, we basically don't even maintain it. So unless someone wants to step up and pick up version 4 and continue maintaining it, there won't be any more releases. It will just get older and older and older and less compatible. And it's not optimized for speed, so it's a bit slower than Pester 5. In some areas it's still faster, but it's not going to get any faster because we won't be optimizing it. And in Pester 5 we probably optimize the slow paths. It has code coverage, which is really useful and really popular metrics with management. And in Pester 4, it's super slow. We are using breakpoints, which weren't meant for this use case. And so pretty much you should be using 100 of them in a script. And we emit sometimes thousands, 10,000. And they just get reshuffled on the runtime all the time, and it just more than quadratically rises with the amount of code that you try to instrument, which is terrible performance. And then lastly, Justin will be talking about his interactive UI for VS Code and how to optimize VS Code for PowerShell development. And he developed this nice integration with the native testing API in VS Code. And that won't work with Pester 4, because Pester 4 simply doesn't have all the interactive features. Why Pester 5? The total opposite of the other slide. It has active development, it has great support. Frode, who unfortunately cannot be here, is doing an awesome job through the past year, 2 years, responding basically to every question, every discussion on Pester repo. There is active community on Discord and on Slack, and you get a lot of support. And usually the first question is are you on Pester 5? Did you consider going to Pester 5 and upgrading? Pester 5 also has new features and will get new features. So most recently, for example, there was integration with GitHub Actions and the output. So if you enable this and we automatically detect for you if you're running in GitHub, then you will get reporting that's just customized to GitHub Actions, so it integrates well. And there are many features like that, and we just continuously try to add more when we have time. I also optimized it for speed, or I tried to make it as fast as I could without rewriting the whole thing into C# and compiled code. So I invented Profiler for this, and I will be talking about that tomorrow, how you can use it and how you can optimize your own code. And it has faster code coverage, which is also based on Profiler. So that is much faster than using breakpoints, because it adds pretty much no overhead to the execution time. And also, most importantly to me, it works with the interactive UI in VS Code because it has all of those interactive features. It can run just a single test, and it just is much a better citizen in this interactive world when you are editing code locally, which at least for me is very important. So if you didn't manage to get a photo of that QR code, then do it now, because I will keep it on for 5 more seconds. I see no one is taking out their phone, I guess, so we can just continue. Cool, so let's talk about the biggest change in Pester 5. The biggest change is that we now have a discovery and run. And those are things that confuse people the most, at least from the feedback that I get. And let me tell you a lot about how it works. So we have a piece of code, which is a Pester test, and we have before all on the top that imports a module. Then we have describe, which describes a group of tests. Then we have another before all to set up the test below it. Then we have it, which is the actual test right here. And then we have after all, let me just connect my mouse. Then we have after all right here that tears down the test. And so now we have 2 phases to go over this script. First, we execute it in discovery. And it's literally just PowerShell execution. You just invoke the script and see what happens. And so all the Pester keywords that are implemented are just functions, and they take script block parameters and some strings. So here we have before all, and it takes a script block. And script block is a piece of code that you can either execute right now, or you can save it and execute it later. And so for some of those keywords, we do that, and for some of those keywords, we don't defer the execution, and we just execute it immediately. And that's where it gets a bit confusing, but there are very clean rules to this, or clear rules. So for the before all, we grab the script block, and we don't execute it because it's a setup for a test, and we don't have any test yet. We don't even know if there will be any test. We continue to describe, and that's again a function that takes a string, and we evaluate the string because that's simply how PowerShell works. If you have a string with double quotes, it just expands all the variables in there. Here we don't have any variables, but if there were any, we would evaluate them right now, or expand them, that's the correct word. And then we continue to a script block. In this case, for describe and context, that's the only case where we actually invoke the script block that is provided. I'm not 100% right also in before discovery, but we will get that into a second. So for describe and context, we will execute the script block because we want to know what's inside of it, if there are any tests or any additional before alls and after alls. We continue, and we again have a function called before all that we encounter. We just grab the script block and save it, and we found our first test. It again gets a string, and it doesn't have any variables, but if there were any, we would expand them, and we would get the full name of the script, of the test. We grab this script block because we don't want to execute it yet. We are just discovering which tests are there. And we continue to after all, which again gets a script block. We save that and continue forward, which is the closing brace of the describe block. And that one we execute. We're just leaving that scope. And we are done with the discovery. So it's nothing else than just the execution of the script top down, but we save the pieces that we will be executing later. And from those pieces, from those script blocks that are now in green, we then build a tree, and execute them as appropriate. And if at the end of the tree there is no test, we just don't execute them. So we see that there is a test here. And so we need to execute this script block, then this script block, then this script block, which is the test. And then in a safe way, we will execute this after all to make sure that the test always gets stared down. And that's the whole principle of the discovery and run. It has some implications on scoping, and I will get into those in a second. But if we look from high point on this code, the user-provided code that executes during discovery are just those two strings, and user code that is provided that executes during run are the 4 script blocks that were provided, the before all, it, and after all. Just to reiterate, what executes in discovery is any code that you put anywhere else than inside of before all, before each, it, after each, and after all. This includes test cases, most importantly, variables in test names, and all code that you place into describe directly. And in run, it's the exact opposite. All the script blocks that you provide to before all, before each, it, after each, and after all will execute. Important thing about run is that it executes in a new empty script scope that is tied to the same script file. So if you do ps script root in both discovery and run, you will see the same file, but they are totally different script scopes, so totally different file. Whatever you define on the script scope in the discovery, you won't see that in the run, because we want to have a clean slate, clean state. And there are many, many issues filed about Pester 4, about polluting the top level scope, and then like having variable defined here when I'm running in VS Code, but not when I run through invoke Pester, and this prevents that. So let's see a demo. This one is just reiterating what I just said, just so you can see it in action. And it should be demo 1. So here I'm using write host to write to the screen. I have 2 colors. First is cyan and the other one is yellow. Yellow runs in run and cyan runs in describe. And even though if you look at it top down, then the code will execute slightly differently. So here I see, let me just clear that out. Here I see the cyan output where I have top of describe, which is coming from here, but I actually have a before all placed in the script above that. So logically, if you just think about this as a top-down execution, it doesn't follow the same rules. Instead, it follows the rules that I just described before. And so we first run this top of describe, then we execute this, which corresponds to this line. Then we look at the name of the first it. So right here, I'm evaluating this sub-expression and write to the screen. And then I have this described just after it, which is this one. And then all the stuff that runs in run gets to execute. So all those yellow messages from here, from all of those blocks repeatedly, from this block, and so on. So just don't think about it like it's structured like this in the script. It was the same thing in Pester 4, it just wasn't as visible. In Pester 4, we also have after each and before each and after all and all of those setup and teardown blocks. And they were also executed out of their scope and out of their order. It's just people usually place them where they end up executing, so it's not as visible. So let's see some patterns and some common problems that span from the discovery and from historically being able to do whatever inside of the script block and it would just somehow execute. Sometimes with like overpopulating the script with a script scope with additional variables, sometimes not, and so on. So first we have before all. This was in Pester version 4, it wasn't mandatory. It was recommended a little bit to use that for setup, but no one did it. And at the examples at the start, we didn't have it, and we didn't have a good documentation, and so on. So before in Pester 4, you would be doing something like this. where you would have just some naked code directly in the script block. You would import your PS1 file, maybe define some variables, maybe like put some other code there as well. In Pester 5, you should put that into a before all block, because then it will execute only when necessary. And this might be a small hit for your script, for your performance of the execution, if you select just one test to execute or maybe some tags. But if you re-import modules with force, it adds up a little bit. So this is good for performance and also for understanding where the data for your tests are versus the actual execution of the tests, which would be the run. More details on this pattern. At the start, in the documentation for Pester 4, because it supported PowerShell 2, we sometimes push this pattern, like you have a split path on my invocation, my command path, then the system under test is another split path on this, and then you dot source it here. This is totally unnecessary in Pester 5. It's totally unnecessary in any code that is that is PowerShell free and newer, because in PowerShell 2, you didn't have PS script root and PS command path, but since you have them since PowerShell free, you can just do it this way. This is the same code as this. It's much easier to remember and understand and type. And personally, I just do it this way. Like I have a PS script root, then you can use whatever side of slash you like because PowerShell can handle it. And then you just spell out the name of the script that you want to import. There is no magic, there is no problem. And so those two patterns are definitely more recommended, and they work with the new before all pattern. So let's just see that in practice quickly. So here I have the code that uses the old pattern. That's probably the most of the work that you will do if you are migrating from Pester 4 to Pester 5 to change the stop of the script to import the correct function. And when I run this, I catch the error here and just write it to the screen, and it says path is not valid because it's null. That's just because this is not defined. And there is simply no way for me to fix it because my invocation is only defined in the top level scope in all the versions of PowerShell, so I cannot do anything with it. Anything else, then recommend you to use the nicer two patterns that are here below, which work and print this output. So similarly to before all, there's also before discovery block, and before discovery block is kind of weird, but it's a semantic block, and it might be a little bit difficult to explain, but when you execute this code and when you execute this line, it does totally the same thing. They both run during discovery and they both run in the scope where the function is called. So this test cases variable will be defined in here as well because it doesn't create any additional scope. If you know what dot sourcing is, which you probably know because you are importing your tested scripts through dot sourcing, then this is basically a different syntax for doing a dot sourcing. Why it's in the framework is because this is like a semantic keyword that can tell you that you didn't just place this code here randomly and misplace it maybe from a before all. Instead, you're saying, I explicitly thought about this and put it here on purpose because I need it for my discovery phase because, for example, I'm importing test cases from an external file inside of my tests. So let's jump to test cases. Test cases as variable names and as all the other functions like describe are evaluated during discovery because they are a parameter to the function that is doing the execution, like an it or a describe, because now you can have test cases on describe. They are just called foreach, and they are called foreach here as well. And so you need to import the data during the discovery and not before all, not in the run using before all. So this would define test cases in the run, but they wouldn't be defined when you are picking up the list from here. So this needs to happen inside of the discovery because test cases are in discovery. Another pain point is variables and scoping. So here we have a variable that is defined during the run because it doesn't have the before all block around it. And so because we jump between two clean script scopes, it will never be defined here because it just vanishes after you finish discovery. So what you can do is that you either use a before all and define it in before all, but if you want to use it in both the discovery and the execution, you can just pass it on using foreach. Foreach is like test cases on it, but you can use it on describe, you can use it on it, and it simply attaches the data to the test object. And then it expands it for the whole tree that's underneath it. And you can put it on the file, you can put it on describe, you can put it on it. So whenever you have the data, you can just attach it to this object and it will get defined. And it works the same way as test cases. So you say here, I want to attach this file location to the hash table that has a file location item in it. And then when we actually execute, we expand each key in the hash table into a separate variable. So this will become a file location variable again. And in Pester 5, additionally, you don't have to specify the param block that would be inserted into the it. So you don't have to do anything else than to just attach it to the object. And this way you transport data between discovery and the run. So what if you want variables with in names? What if you want to use them? Then you can use them together with before all. You just need to use a slightly different syntax that in similar fashion as a script block differs the expansion of the data in the name of the test. So the problem here is that we have this file location, but file location is not defined yet because we are in discovery phase, but we are defining it here in run. And so we need a way to tell PowerShell, like, this is not something that you want to evaluate right now. And theoretically, you could do that with escaping this $sign. And then we could re-evaluate again the string. But that has a lot of problems. So, and we already had the syntax before with test cases. So I just reused the same thing. And so instead of saying $file location, you can use those angle brackets and use that to denote a name of a variable that you want to expand. And this will happen after the before all that would be placed either here or in this describe block. So once you use it, you will see it kind of follows a logical sense and expands everything that you might need. It also can be data from the parameters that you provided to the script and so on. So it just tries to use anything that's in the current execution scope. And this templating engine also has nice features that allow you to expand, like drill more deeper into the objects that you're providing. With test cases, you would normally have to have very flat object to be able to put it into the name. But in here, you can just drill down. What it does is that it removes those angle brackets and just prefixes $, and then evaluates it. So whatever you can put there, as long as that will become a correct syntax, it will evaluate it, and you will get the value inside of this output. Then the next one is in-module scope. In-module scope is quite popular with module authors because it allows you to peek inside of your module and look at the internals, define some mocks, and then maybe test. And in Pester 4, you can just grab it and put it around the whole file. But what happens with that is that you're just now looking directly into your module and you see everything. And then when you write a test, you're writing a test to the internals of the module, not to the public interface, the exported functions and the exported variables. And you most often don't want to do that. So much better pattern that also works very well in Pester 5 is that you wrap just the item that you want to mock, for example, with the in-module scope. And you use that to peek to the insides of the module, define your mocks, and then you jump out back and just look at the public interface, and then you test that. So you would have this in-module scope inside of the it, and then the code that is testing would follow. This can be used for various things, but the mocking is the most important and most used. And for mocking, we also have a shortcut for this where you just say mock and the module name, and that will do essentially the same thing. But if you want to do something more advanced where we don't have a good pattern for it, then you would put in module scope directly into the it, and it would still work. So foreach, something that's very popular with library authors and with people that like data-driven tests, is to grab a foreach block, a foreach command, and just put it around an it and then generate those tests. If you follow the rules that I outlined in the describe versus run, all of this will still work. Like you do import, you get your data, you do foreach over it, and then you just generate the it with the name. All of this would work except for this $_, because that will get cleaned up when the discovery ends and you will never see it again. And also this syntax is pretty ugly. Well, this one is as well, but this is also ugly. So both of them are pretty bad. What we have in Pester 5, unlike in Pester 4, is that test cases and foreach, which are both the same thing, they're just aliased differently, can accept not only hash tables, but they can accept any object. They just look at the array or at the object, and if they see this is a hash table, they will try to expand it. But if it's not a hash table, they won't touch it. So if you give it an array of integers, it will just generate one it for every integer in that array, much like foreach. So if you have external data that you want to provide, for example, like those test cases, you can either load them right here, or you can define a parameter on the script level in the test, and then you can just provide the data externally. So you don't even have to define how to load the data inside of your test. And then you just put it here, and it will just expand it for one item into each test case. And because you can do this on the describe level as well, then you can push the data into the describe, and then you can also expand them. So you can have like a whole description of how your test should be running, built from hash tables and arrays. And then you just apply it at some template that says like, this is a file should have this header, and it should have like, let's apply it to a command and a help. So you would say a command should have annotated all the parameters, and it should have help. And help means for each parameter set that we have, and each parameter, it means this, like those 10 tests for each one, and those 10 tests for each of the types. So you can all define that and just pipe it in, and then it will just expand into infinite amount of tests. I don't know how big your commandlet is, but you can do all of that magic with this without any foreaches. And those are the common stumbling points. So now we also have parameters and configuration that you will probably see when you just try to run your tests, because that's the first thing you are going to do, like invoke Pester, run your test, you just copy paste from what you had before, or just upgrade a module and it blows up. Well, we try not to blow up in this way because there is a legacy compatibility parameter set that is the same as version 4. And it has all the same parameters. Most of them work almost the same. So if you just copy paste how you execute your Pester 4 tests, it will execute, hopefully. This parameter set will give you a warning that it's legacy and it will go away. But Pester 5 is there for a few years and it so far didn't go away. So that's kind of a wasted warning, but it might go away at some point. Once I make this my full-time job, and like, I don't know. But Pester itself natively has 2 parameter sets plus the legacy parameter set. And one parameter set in Pester is the simple parameter set that was aimed at people who are just starting. You just give it a path, or you give it nothing because the dot here is the default. You might give it some exclude, you might give it some tags, but you're probably not going to because you're a beginner. And then you just say, I want CI, which enables code coverage, enables the output into a location that's next to the execution, enables exit on error so it fails in your CI pipeline, and you have everything set up. So you don't have to spell test results will go into this file, test results will have this format, and so on. And so this is the simple parameter set. But if you want to do something more advanced and you don't want to use the legacy parameter set, then you can use the advanced parameter set. And that has just a single parameter, which is configuration. And configuration is an object that is used internally in Pester to do any type of configuration. So whatever you define, either through parameters or either through something else, it will always end up being this object. And that's always used in every single place where we are trying to figure out if something was configured by a user. So it's way less error prone than what we had in Pester 4. And it's also easy to extend. So I know it looks a bit scary, but if you have it as a big hash table or if you have it as this object, you can quite easily navigate it and there is help inside of it. So, okay, Siri. So at the top, that would be what you would use before to do very, very simple execution. And then if you want way more control over what happens, what are even the extensions of a test file, like if you want to rename them to be acceptance tests or .acceptance tests.ps1, you can definitely do it through this configuration object. But what you would do is that you generate a new configuration object, you define the run path, this is the default anyway, and then you can define the exit to be true, then you can enable this test result, and if you want, you would customize it with a custom name, but it has sensible defaults already. You can maybe change the output verbosity to detailed, and I think I shown that here as well. I didn't. But Pester 5 also has a different default output, so detailed is much closer to what you're used to in Pester 4, so maybe you might want to check that out. And then you would just invoke Pester with the configuration. The actual object looks like this. It's very self-describing, and every level that you go to will tell you what exactly is available there and what you can do with it. So if you go into run.path, it will tell you this is the path for your test, this is what it will be used for, this is the current value, and this is the default value. For path, that would be just dot, the current folder. And that's there for every single item. So you don't have to remember how to define a hash table that Pester will consume to do code coverage. You just look at this object and you just go through it just by the dot notation, and it will give you immediate help. Am I at time for questions? I think I am, right? So let's skip over this demo. Let me give you a summary. Probably the most important thing that you can do is to understand the difference of discovery and run and experiment with it a bit. And probably the biggest stumbling point that you will have is passing data between discovery and run. And you can always use foreach for that. Just think about it. In discovery, I'm generating some data set that I want to have translated into tests. And then if there is any additional data that I'm not providing as parameters, I have to do that through test cases. So it gets attached to the object. And then I will move to run, and the data from the object will be picked up, but everything else is cleaned up. Cool, that was all the content that I had. Now let's pick a winner. Let's hope the internet works. Who wants to win a t-shirt? Okay, before I was putting this raffle in place, someone told me, like, just ask the question and whoever raised their hand first will win. You would be a clear winner, man. Where's that thing? Why? Let's see. Why? That. Let's hope it doesn't pick me, because I think there's one answer for me. And I already have a t-shirt, so I'm good. No, you cannot run the script until the session starts. Cool, let's run it now. Pum, 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 pum. Daniel, it's you. Cool. Woo. You will probably have to come pick it up. I will find a t-shirt for you afterwards. I have a big bag because I don't want to go there because it probably will kill the mic off. Whew. So, question time now. I have a microphone.
I have a question. Is that a serious question?
Okay.
How can you improve the tag filtering performance?
Okay, so the question is, how can you improve the tag filtering improvements? Can you tell me more specifics about what is the problem? Is it just too slow?
The thing that is slowing down our DBHX V5 Pester rewrite is the time to go and check the tags. So as we add more tags into the file, obviously it's taking time. But do you have any quips, ideas of how we can improve that? We pre-filter the file, so we know which file we're in. But some of our, we can have 80, 90, 100 tests, which will all have an individual tag.
Yeah, I don't really have an idea how to do that right now. If you already pre-filtered the file, the only more specific filter there is, except for the tag, is the line filter. So unless you explicitly know which test you want to run, you have to go through the whole file to check the tags. But maybe we can figure something out, to avoid the whole lookup, because you basically are doing discovery at that point, right? And then you filter it down. I'm not sure if it would be applicable to you, but maybe we can do pre-AST the whole file, and that would have limitations for the general use where you would have functions that generate tests, which you probably have in DBHX, right? So that wouldn't be applicable, but something like that. Let's have a look on that later. There was a second question there. I'm just going to turn this on. Can you just pass it back? I don't want to go in front of the speakers. I don't know.
It's turned on, but I think I just have to shout as Rob did. Okay. So can you go to the demo one you prepared?
Yeah.
So in Pester v4, it would be able to, I would be able to use an integer generator. If you go to line 4.
Yes.
And do something like just in line 4, 1.10.
Yeah.
And
okay, it's working now. For each object, can now wrap the whole describe block into this for each block.
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. Does this work with Pester v5, or how can we do such a thing?
You can do totally the same. It will just generate more describes, or you can just do it like this. And that should give us 10 different describes. Oh yeah, it's actually dash for each. And it will just run all the tests over and over and over. We have 2 tests here, so that times 10 is 20.
Okay. And how
here.
It's working here. Okay. And how can we access the the object in the for each now within this? Let's say in line 7. Can we use the $_ operator here?
This one here, yes. That would be $_. That's defined for every single item inside of the whole block. You can also expand it here in the get avocado, like that, I hope. I probably need a different type of output for it. Yeah, we would have to enable or break a test. That's probably a better way to do this. Just throw a. So we get in the minimal output, you don't get the non-broken tests and you don't get the describes. So here I have the output from the describe. So I'm already expanding that value, even though it's coming from the test cases that's directly on the describe. So this way, or you can just wrap it in your old for each. The only downside of it is that this variable won't be defined in the run. So test cases solve that. And you can even inherit the variables like from above, because this is just normal script execution. So with the additional data-driven capabilities, you can define a parameter block here and give it some parameters like A, that will be your input data, and that will be automatically defined for you on both discovery and on the top level describe. So you also have it available in run. And you can use pieces of that if it's, for example, an array of hash tables. Then you could expand it here, and then you could access it in here in the below describes. I think there was one question behind you. If that answers your question, no?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Sure, go on.
My question would be, where is the right place to define a mock?
Right place to define a mock?
Yeah.
You can do it anywhere in the tree, as long as it's in before all or before each. So during a run.
Okay, because I don't know if I remember it correctly, but I tried to define it in before all, and it made a difference whether I called invoke Pester from within the folder where all the tests are, or whether I invoked it explicitly by specifying the file name. And in one of those cases, it did not access the mock function, but I mocked read host, and it asked me for my input.
Okay. I remember there were some edge cases around this, but this is the target goal, how it should be working. So if you can reproduce the problem, send us an issue on GitHub, and I'll have a look on it. Because that's the target goal. Like, you can put it anywhere in the tree, and it just applies to everything that's below it, as long as it's in the run phase. So it's in before all or before each.
Okay.
So that should be the correct place to put it. Do we have any more questions? We still have 2 minutes. Okay, in that case, thank you for attending. Hopefully it was useful for you.